Let's dive into today's top stories. Russia says it's winning the war. So why are civilians in Moscow being told to hide underground? If everything is under control, why are bomb shelters opening across Russia right now?
The Kremlin keeps repeating the same line: Ukraine cannot defend itself, but reality tells a very different story. Day after day, the results on the battlefield prove that Ukraine is not just surviving, it is striking back deep inside the enemy's own territory. Putin's propaganda is built on threats: conquering Ukraine, humiliating the West, waving the nuclear card. Yet on the ground, that illusion of unstoppable power has been shattered. This time, Ukraine didn't just speak. It acted. From Moscow to Crimea, from St. Petersburg to Kaliningrad, Russia itself is now under fire. And no matter how loudly Putin threatens the world, he understands one painful truth: the war is no longer confined to Ukraine. So here's the question no one in Moscow wants to answer. No, if Russia is winning everywhere, why are civilians in Moscow and St. Petersburg being told to prepare for life underground? Go. The answer is simple: because the war has entered Russian homes. Today, the conflict is no longer something Russians watch on television. It has reached their bedrooms, their basements, their shelters. The situation has become so desperate, governors of a so-called nuclear power superpower, a report for, the situation has become so desperate that regional governors of a so-called nuclear superpower are begging citizens to hide wherever they can, even in cupboards, because proper shelters don't exist. Then these warnings have ignited panic. Russians are rushing to banks and markets. Families are trying to carve out underground living spaces, fearing what comes next. Today on Mr. Warlog, we expose how Putin's dream of a greater Russia has collapsed into maps of bomb shelters, abandoned basements, and a population preparing for war and poverty. This is the moment where propaganda ends and sirens begin. Banned Ukrainian strikes over the past 24 hours have hit power plants, ammunition depots, and command centers across Russia. There is no longer a single place that feels truly safe. Putin may claim that everything is under control, but he cannot even protect his own cities. That's why the panic button has been pressed in the Kremlin. And according to investigative reports, Russia's Ministry of Emergency Situations has allocated billions to renovate Soviet-era bomb shelters. Officials admit that more than 2/3 of these shelters are unusable, flooded, decayed, or converted into storage rooms. Now, under pressure, renovations are being rushed through courts and emergency decrees. This is not preparation for peace. This is preparation for what they fear is coming. And the fear isn't limited to border regions. Even St. Petersburg, nearly 8 kilometers from Ukraine, is converting apartment basements into shelters for millions of residents. A city that survived Nazi siege 80 years ago is once again being pushed underground. Jamalist, but this time the threat isn't coming from Berlin. It's coming from Kyiv, the same city Putin once claimed would fall in 3 days. Bondi. At the same time, Russia has begun mass producing mobile nuclear shelters designed to protect against radiation. So ask yourself, if everything is fine, why is the state quietly preparing its people for nuclear survival? And while billions are poured into shelters and missiles, ordinary Russians face a brutal economic reality. Butter is locked in supermarket cases to prevent theft. Egg prices have exploded. Chicken is traded on black markets. Taxes are rising across the board. Interest rates have crushed mortgages. Dreams of home ownership are gone. Dominant official inflation numbers tell one story. Reality at the checkout counter tells another. Russia now resembles a war factory, producing tanks and missiles that can't be eaten, worn, or sold. They simply explode while refrigerators stay empty. What the Kremlin calls economic quality is nothing more than feeding the war machine at the expense of its people. And psychologically, the damage runs even deeper. On television, state anchors shout about victory and greatness. Outside, air defense systems sit on rooftops, and basements are turned into shelters. People whisper the same question in private. If we're winning, why are we hiding? This isn't confidence. It's learned helplessness. People no longer expect victory, only survival. Soviet era kitchen conversations have returned, where fear keeps voices low and criticism stays hidden behind closed doors. Meanwhile, corruption lurks beneath every shelter project. History tells us what happens to emergency budgets in Russia: inflated costs, shadow contractors, and empty promises. Shelters exist on paper, but in reality, many are little more than painted ruins. And there's another brutal truth no one wants to admit. Who will even build these shelters? Russia's workforce has been hollowed out by war, mobilization, brain drain, and mass emigration. Skilled workers are gone, buried, wounded, or fled. Unemployment numbers look good, but only because there's no one left to hire. And while ordinary Russians are told to hide in damp basements, Putin himself has prepared something very different. Deep beneath luxury residences near the Black Sea and the Ural Mountains lie elite, nuclear-proof shelters, complete with clean water systems, ventilation, and comfort unimaginable to ordinary citizens. Air defenses protect his roof, not theirs. This is the true face of modern Russia, a country being driven underground so one man can feel safe. Basements cleared, parking garages converted, villages evacuated. Ukraine is defending itself and forcing the consequences back onto those who started the war. Blend history may remember this era not as a time of victory, but as Russia's shelter years. Look, the real question now is this: how long can a nation survive when its leader promises hiding instead of hope?